All right, so thank you for joining us here for this iteration of Softball February. Question for you as we get started and folks are getting connected. In the chat, could you answer, how's that New Year's resolution going? Did you set an intention this year? Did you, like Heidi, have a word of the year? Or like me, have kind of a theme for the year? Heidi, what was your word?
My word is a continuation from last year, so I'm sticking with streamline. I chose at the beginning of 23, I chose warmth. And 3 months in, I decided, oh, no. What I want is to streamline. And so I feel like it hasn't gotten a full year and is a good word. I like it. It deserves a full 12 months at least.
And Luke, did you set intention or a resolution or a goal for the year?
You know, I said a bunch, but you know, the sort of overarching thing that I'm working on is not quite quite a real word, but contentedness, right? Like that's the thing I'm working on. It's like, you know, like I've got all these irons in the fire and schemes and works and, you know, too many emails or not enough emails. And it's just like, well, one step back, like I'm existing in this world that I'm creating. So trying to be content in it is kind of the thing that I'm working on.
Ongoing struggle.
Love that.
Right.
Really love that.
Ongoing struggle.
Yeah.
What'd you 2024. Say? What's that, Luke?
I'm saying, what was yours? What? Yeah.
2024 for me, I've been calling the year of space. And by space, I really mean time. So maybe I should call it the year of time. But this idea of trying to have a friendlier relationship with time, not trying to always be saving it for another moment or trying to make the most of it and stretching myself too thin, but just having a really friendly relationship with time. And so I've been doing a lot of thinking about that. Made some real changes. Like I've outsourced some things. I've hired some folks to help me with different projects, and that feels really good. So I think I'm moving in the right direction. Ask me again in 2025.
Oh, we will.
We will. Right on.
I like that some folks in the chat are saying no intentions, just flowing, which I like, Julia. But then there's also some make time, kind of in your camp there, Zach. Some fitness, some declutter, clarity. I like it. Oh, stitch more. I like that too.
Oh yeah.
All right. Well, keep them coming. Keep them coming. We love to hear what's on your mind and what you're thinking about. Chances are, from what it looks like so far, we're all thinking about a lot of the same things. So today we're really excited. We'll do introductions here in just a moment, and then maybe give us, as we introduce ourselves, a sneak preview of what you'll be talking about so folks will know. If this is your first time here, could you raise your little digital hand? You can find that under reactions at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And it looks like this little yellow hand. If it's your first time here, we're not going to call you out. We just want to say howdy do. My name is Zach. I am a quilter and a textile artist based in Brooklyn, New York, but from North Carolina originally. I host the Nook, the Quilty Nook, which you probably heard about. I host the Seamside podcast, which is opening up all kinds of doors for my own creative practice. So it's kind of fun to have a public project that also is really seeding some deeply personal creative things as well. So that's me. I do the Nook, I do Seamside, and right at the moment I am sewing a little fabric bead that I learned from your LA friend Luke, Debbie Weiss, Specs and Keepings. She did a workshop with us recently about how to make these little fabric beads, and I can't get enough because one of my little side projects, which I thought about talking today, was making like little mobiles and stuff out of found objects, and the fabric beads are part of that. But I gotta talk about something else. I'll be talking about the huddle. We just had our first in-person gathering for the Nook last week in upstate New York. So I've got a lot of stories and photos to share with y'all from that. So that's me. Heidi?
Oh, well, I am Heidi Parks. I'm here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and this is a new studio of mine. I am the current artist in residence at the Pfister Hotel. I'll be here all year. I do a lot of hand quilting, hand piecing. Last soft bulk, I launched the news that I was teaching a year-long quilt making class. And so I'm delighted to say that now I'm the instructor of that year-long quilt making class to a sold out crowd. And I was a high school art teacher for nearly a decade, and I just continue to love teaching quilting alongside making quilts and being an artist. Luke.
Well, good morning, everybody. Well, it's morning where I am anyway, so good whatever time it is to you, wherever you happen to be. I'm Luke Haynes, recovering architect, quilt addict. I'm going to talk about quilt clothing today because I've made a couple. It's new to me, not at all new to the community, but it's a fun thing to communicate about and share and talk about. And yeah, excited to delve in.
Luke, I've been thinking about you the last couple of days. You saying dry there in LA? You've been getting all kinds of rain.
Oh yeah, so we're in LA, and so one of Nicole and I's favorite things to do when it rains is to drive down to the LA River, which is the drainage ditch that the entirety of LA drains into, and see how full it is. So far, we live on a little hill, so our house is not in danger of a mudslide or a flood, but there's a lot going on over here. My garden's real happy, so really, win-win.
And you see Honeydew, his dog in the background. Beautiful Honeydew. Hey, baby girl. I got to spend 6 beautiful weeks with her about a year ago. Now, I just had a thought that left. I think we're ready to get started. What about y'all?
Sounds good.
Absolutely. Take it away. I want to see what you've been doing.
Take it away. Well, let me see if I can figure out this Canva presentation situation. I was confiding to Heidi before we went live that I couldn't even find my presentation from a couple months ago. I was like, oh, I'll just start from scratch. And I chose to start in Canva, which is, yeah, why not try something new in front of, 65 people.
Exactly.
Okay, I think I got this. Okay, well, wherever you are, whether it's LA or somewhere else, I hope that you are safe and warm and dry and happy. Because we're going to look at some pretty pictures of upstate New York. All right. Heidi, can you confirm that you see my screen?
Oh yeah, looks great. Silver dollar quilt.
That's it. Okay. So I had so many things that came to mind when Heidi and I and Luke and I said that we wanted to get together for another softball. I was like, oh, I could talk about this particular quilt that I've made recently because it has so many stories to it. But then I realized I've told all these stories on Seamside. So you can listen to me talk about the silver dollar quilt on Seamside. Thank you to everybody who's been sending me messages and emails and writing comments. People got a lot to say about this quilt, and as they should. It's dealing with some themes that can be touchy a lot of times, right? So we're talking about religion, and we're talking about race, and we're talking about wealth, and how I see all of that playing out in my particular family. So there's a lot of food for thought, we'll say that. So you can check that out. I also thought that maybe one of the things I would talk about is Destroy This Quilt, which is a quilt along that we're doing on the Nook. You get 2 prompts every 2 weeks. One prompt will get you adding something to a whole cloth quilt, and the other prompt will get you transforming it somehow, because we're not actually destroying it, just to clarify. The Nook is crazy about this Destroy This Quilt along. It's really cute. If you want to join us, there's still plenty of time. We're only on the 3rd prompt, right? So there's still plenty of time to get caught up. Each prompt only takes a couple hours to work through. So that's that. I could have talked the whole time about either one of these things, but really what continues to be top of mind for me is the fact that I'm still resident of Cloud 9 after the first ever huddle, Nook huddle that we had last week, 10 days ago. I saw there was, Agneta, I see you out there. Is there anybody else here in the audience that was at the huddle? Could you raise your hand or say hi in the chat, one or the other? Because if so, you're about to relive some really good stories. If you weren't there with us, you'll get to hear them firsthand. And there's so many things that I could share with you about this, but I had to boil it down just for time's sake. And so we're going to listen to 3 different stories that people had to share. And then just know that there will be a whole episode of Seamside where each of these folks that you see, each of these smiling faces, was asked to slip into an old antique telephone booth with a recorder and share their thoughts. And so you'll get to hear from each one of these people coming up in about a week on Seamside. Today, though, we're just gonna, oh, hi, Nicole, that's right. Wonderful, good to see you. So here is the first ever huddle house. We were like quilty Kardashians for the weekend. It was really fun because I'm not usually like a high roller like this, you know, but turns out even a big house, if you divide it 21 ways, is pretty affordable, relatively considered. Here's our kitchen where we had like potlucks and communal meals. It's right on the Hudson River, and you can see that out the background there. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful places just to sit and sew. One thing we loved about this house was that there were so many nooks and crannies, if you will, to just sit and sew and spend time with one another, right? These tables were amazing because the one that you see closest to the mirror was like our communal sewing machine table, and the one you see closest to us was just our catch-all. So that was our fabric cutting station. It was our dinner table. It was a few different things. We got to hang out. Amanda and I have been working on the quilt that you see here. Actually, that's 2 quilts, one layered on top of another, which we'll be sharing more about soon, but we got to see them for the first time together, which was really sweet. And my beloved partner that you might have seen sneak in the background here just a minute ago even got in on the sewing fun. So there's Travis with a little quilt top that he made. Victoria Vanderlaan, if you're familiar with her, she releases every Saturday morning 5 stretch canvases at a pay what you wish model. She's been doing it now for, I think, 3 years. Don't quote me, either 2 or 3 years. And she only lived 30 minutes away from Catskill, New York. So she agreed to come down. We went out to lunch, and then she came back for a little impromptu trunk show, which is really, really special. There's us looking at one of her quilts. The overarching challenge of the weekend, it was a very loosey-goosey, lightly structured weekend. We had a quilt challenge that everybody was working on, and that was about the only parameters. The challenge was this. We called it a 4-corner quilt. And participants were asked to bring one of 4 different things to share with people. So bring a piece of new fabric, a piece of repurposed fabric, a notion or a bauble, and an unconventional material. We then sorted those out on this ping pong table, which is already divided into quadrants, so it was actually perfect. And then people had to pick one thing from each category, each corner, to make a quilt over the weekend. And so as you're looking at quilts coming up here in the next few minutes, all of these are 4-corner quilts. And so the stories that I picked to share with you today, and like I said, there are so many. So if I don't get to share your story today, just know that it is coming out on Seamside soon. But the stories I really wanted to share with you were stories of transformation and stories of self-realization and actualization. So one of the stories that just has a immediate pow effect is this one from Jeff Thomas. You see him smiling in the top right corner. He had made this perfectly lovely quilt top from the materials that we had on the ping pong table, but he still wasn't quite happy with it. And so at some point, and I don't remember what inspired this, he started playing around with ribbon and did this, and everybody was gagged. We were like, Jeff, you just did something. When I look at this, his line work with this ribbon, it feels very distinctive to me. Like there, as just from my personal point of view, I'm like, Jeff, there's something here that's just so your voice, like just so unique, that I hope you take some ribbon home with you and continue to play with this idea, because look at the transformation between those 2 quilts, and all he added was this wobbly, wonky little line. Linnea Gutierrez, it was maybe the second night of the weekend, and 10 p.m., so pretty late at night. And Linnea comes into the room where some of us were sitting and so on, and she says, Zach, I need to call in the big dog. And turns out I was the big dog. She says, I've made this quilt that you see here on the left, but I wonder if people are just being nice when I ask for feedback. Could I get your, unvarnished opinion? And I said, yeah, this will be fun. Let's go. And so I walked to the other room with her, and this is what we saw. And there's a lot to admire about this quilt, but when I look at it and then talking with Linnea, she wasn't feeling like it was really connecting with her concept, which was connection and parenthood and the parent-child relationship. And so even though it was already late at night, on the second night, I said, Linnea, could we just play around for 20 minutes and just see what we come up with? So through our conversation, some question asking and things like that, she transformed what you see on the left to this brand new thing that she loves. I'm gonna let Linnea tell you the story first person. This clip is about, I think, 1.5 minutes long. I'm gonna pause, Can y'all hear that? Heidi, can you confirm, or Luke, can you confirm that you're able to hear the audio?
Cannot.
Okay. I think I need to click that magic button.
I think it's that when you're sharing. It's so easy to not notice that one.
Because they hide it down there. Okay, here we go.
Mhm.
I'm gonna let Linnea tell the story because she tells it way better than I can.
Not hearing it.
Hello, this is Linnea
Got it.
Gutierrez. What's most fresh in my mind is that we've been working this weekend, and my reflection is really that in my life, I'm both the leader of a household and the leader of an organization, and so are asked to be very decisive. And so I think when I struggle with those decisions, it's often in retrospect and often in isolation. And so I got the opportunity to struggle with a problem through my quilt with someone else named Zach Foster. He was able to really lead me through this process, but for the gift of or the luxury of time to have the conversation and have someone else ask you the questions to really consider what the answer should be or could be, and letting me or helping me play with the possibility with something in terms of my practice that I want to translate back in those other roles that I play when I'm not working with cloth.
And this moment with Linnea was one of my favorite moments just personally over the weekend, because as a guide of just thinking through, like, these are the questions I would ask myself when it comes to building a new quilt, and to be able to think through that with somebody else and have them discover their own answers felt really special. And then to think about how she's going to continue this same creative process in other areas of her life too, very satisfying, because I often like to think of textiles as soft laboratories for living, is kind of how I come to think of it. And so Linnea's tapping into that. Now, next, Jackie Wheeler made this beehive. And Jackie is coming from Texas. She has this bent of kind of like a folk art vibe. And here you see, and these are all works in progress, right? So you'll see them if you follow these people on Instagram, you'll see the finished product soon enough. But what I love about Jackie's story that she's going to share here is that sometimes the fabric we work with mirrors back to us our subconscious, right? So here's Jackie's story.
This is Jackie. For me, working with textiles and cloth is sometimes like working with a tarot deck. I go into my stash with a single idea or intention and just instinctively pull the fabrics, mulling over a certain idea. For instance, at the huddle, mulling over the idea of finding a piece of fabric that looks like a beehive and just pulling in from whatever is out there working in the universe, whatever the message is that I need to hear, just instinctively start pulling fabrics and then begin with a base plan, but follow wherever that textile leads me. At the huddle this weekend, I was working with the bees, and I thought I was just working off of a theme of hominess, and I wasn't really certain why. But the more I worked the cloth and worked with what I would pull from the big community pile, I found that I was pulling things from memory. And in the end, when I thought that I was just doing a simple beehive, I had actually pulled on the inner hope that I could be with my mom that I lost 3 years ago, and how much she would have loved being at a retreat like this, and how we had planned to go to retreats like this, but never got the chance because she passed unexpectedly. And as I kept pulling things and talking with other people and looking at the motifs that were coming through, I found my mother was with me the entire time. The beekeep was a constant theme in our lives. The further all the creatives worked with me and the cloth worked with me, I found that I was really channeling what probably I had intended in the tarot in the beginning was that my mom could be with me on my first retreat.
It wouldn't surprise me if all of us here in the Zoom room together at the moment haven't had a similar moment where you're like, oh, I thought I was working on this project, but really there was a much deeper undercurrent that wanted to come forth. And so that Jackie was able to sense that undercurrent and then manifest it and bring it into the world in this quilt. It gives me the good kind of goosebumps, you know? So thank you, Jackie, for being so vulnerable and transparent and willing to share this story with us. You'll get to hear, there's more to this story, but this is the abridged version. You'll get to hear the full one coming up on Seamside. Now, this is one of my indelible memories. I think this is a core memory, folks. I think it's going to stick around forever. Cindy Russell in this sweet little quilty jacket, Luke, there you go, sweet little quilty jacket, had made what you see here on the floor was a perfectly lovely still life with flowers. And then on the last morning together, I was one of the early birds. It was like 6 a.m. Me and a couple other folks are up. And Cindy comes tearing up the stairs from her bedroom, scissors already in hand. And she's like, we're cutting it up. She's like, I don't like this quilt. And so we're like, are you sure? And so we asked Cindy to take the first cut. And then everybody that was already awake at that hour started cutting into it. And y'all wait till you see what this quilt looks like now. So remember this. I'm gonna hit the button. Jaw drop. I'm like, Cindy, this is incredible. This is incredible. This is such a lovely piece. It still speaks to the original, right? Look at the beautiful green flower. But there it is, entirely transformed. And that was a product of all of the conversations and all the energy just coursing through the Huddle House over the weekend. Then the last story I have, and I'll pass the mic to Heidi, is just this is a clip from a conversation that Maddie and Sherry recorded together, and that's them with their hearts around their face. But I think it's safe to say that they spoke for many of us at the Huddle, and probably many of us in general, when we think about why we quilt and why we want to quilt together.
It's something people for so long would do while they're just chatting with their friends, or they'd work on quilts together. And I think it's such a foundational part of quilts, or a foundational part of textiles. And it's really cool to come back to that in a more modern way. We're not all working on a quilt together, but to have all of these critiques, and then also to just chat, have that idea of just like a stitching circle. It's just, it feels like a coming home, or it feels such an inspirational way to do it for me. And then also, I just really want to take that away from you here and just remember how almost like life-giving it was to do these sorts of things.
Yeah, I love like sitting, even if you're working on independent projects, if you're sitting and having a conversation while you're working, I feel like it just puts some magic
really
into
does.
the conversations. And
Yeah.
I really feel like it really draws people together.
This weekend was full-blown magic. Zero drama. I think the most drama was that the morning there, everybody was checking out. There was some snow, and some of us got stuck in the snow driving away from the Huddle House. But that was as drama as it got. We had such a good time. And I can't wait to see how folks are finishing up their projects and things like that. Now, there will be another Huddle. The first one was kind of a test drive, but it was an unqualified success, if I can say so myself. And so one of the things we're looking at, this is a map of where all the Nookers live in the United States. And so top of the list for Huddle spots would be in the Chicago, Milwaukee area. Hi, Heidi. Or maybe in the Western North Carolina, Asheville area, maybe Santa Fe or LA, Luke, or up around San Francisco. Those are kind of the spots we're considering at the moment. So if that sounds cool, like you want to be a part of it, I will be announcing the next Huddle through my mailing list, which if you're here live, you're already on. Congratulations. But if you're watching the recording, you may or may not be. So make sure to sign up for my mailing list. If you're not, I'm sure Heidi will put a link in the YouTube show notes below for that. And that way, as soon as we have something announced, you can jump in if you want to. So with that, I'm going to stop my share, and I'm going to take a look at the chat. Vote for Asheville. Yeah, I got you. Vote for Chicago. Oh, yeah. I know, I know, I know. So thank you for letting me share those stories. Like I said, in a week, there will be a whole Seamside episode where you'll get to hear 20 stories unabridged back to back. And that'll also, um, there might be some teary moments, but the good kind of tears.
I just about
Thank
had
you, everybody.
a teary moment with that story about her mom. Oh my goodness.
These
Yeah,
things crop up sometime when we don't even expect it to.
yeah. Oh,
But what a way to honor the memory, you know?
well, it's so fun to finally get to hear more about how the huddle was, because you created a lot of space to huddle and you were not posting about it live on Instagram. I was reminded that it had happened when Amanda posted her post huddle photo. And I was like, oh, I didn't even see that. So it's a really cool example of how you are bringing that idea of space into reality and just sharing after the fact instead of during.
It turns out, yeah, it's hard to be like, with such an intense experience like this gathering was, it's hard to be present there and documenting everything and sharing online and doing all those things. So I just gave up on everything that wasn't the present moment. And maybe next time I'll help. I don't know. I'll get better pictures and things like that next time. But I'm working those kinks out as we go.
Remembering to document when you're having fun is not
So
easy.
hard.
Yeah.
Okay, but you're having fun.
Oh yeah. All right. Let me share my screen. A little preview. Okay, so this is me. This was me on a recent teaching trip in France. And then here I am in Milwaukee where I live. And just to come full circle from the last episode, so they're conjoined, quilt making was just has been an incredible joy to get started teaching this series. I'm so happy to see Becky in the comments saying that we should have a huddle in Milwaukee. I would love that. She's part of quilt making. And getting to spend time in our co-working sessions, sewing together has been awesome. Getting to see students share, they all do a 10-minute presentation as an update, which I think is such a nice example of soft bulk creeping into my life, that a 10-minute update could be so transformative to have to do that and share it with an audience, or to get to share that with an audience. And as maybe a little preview of that now, I do an annual March quilt along. I started that in 2020 with my scavenger hunt quilt. And Zach, it's been fun to see the similarities and differences with your Destroy This quilt with my first quilt pattern. And Destroy This quilt is all the rage in quilt making with me. That's for sure. Like, I think maybe at least a third of us are destroying a quilt, and it's been incredible to see that process and get to talk about it and not reveal all your secrets, because you got to be in the Nook to know all the secrets about it. And so as a little bit of a preview to that, and even a preview to what I do as the instructor for my diary quilting classes. This year, rather than a traditional quilt along with a new pattern that's a specific pattern, last year we did my vignettes quilt pattern as a second round quilt along. So this time it's going to be a finish along. I'm going to be inviting people to finish things alongside me. It can be one of my quilt patterns. It can also be something that you started in a class with me. So say you went to France and you're not done yet, you could finish that quilt, or at least get a little bit more progress, revive it as in the finish along that I'm going to be hosting in March. And so I'm going to share a little bit more about that later, but there are a lot of free ways to participate on Instagram, and those are all highlighted on my blog. But there's also a series of co-working sessions where we're going to meet one day a week for 5 weeks. And even if it's you took my on-demand framed quilt class and you just want to have some community around it, it's going to be a place for that. And I think another reason why finishing is top of mind for me is that now I'm doing this artist residency, which is very exciting to get to share about with everyone. And I recorded a Seamside episode with Zach right here in this room. You can listen to that and get a fuller picture of the Pfister artist residency. But I applied 3 times and I was a finalist 3 times in 2015, 17, and 18. And then I thought I better take a break and start applying to something else. And so then I started being a finalist for the Mary Knoll Fellowship here in Milwaukee instead of a finalist for this. But I was ultimately hand selected and invited to be the artist in residence here at the hotel. And it's just so exciting to get it to do this project at this moment in life. It's really nice to be a more established artist. It would have been so different when it was in the beginning part of my career. So it's just that feeling that sometimes things are all meant to be, like we're on this path, and like I was always meant for this to be the year and not the previous year. But you can see me working on this pink quilt, and on the right it's a quilt top, and on the left it is, well, maybe it wasn't being quilted. No, it was quilted. It's being quilted in that photo. I took that picture last night. And it's been nice to arrive here and see it as an occasion to wrap up this quilt that I began in August. I was doing a week-long class at Woodland Ridge Retreat and in Wisconsin. And that's when I began the quilt. And then I flew with it to France with me, and I brought it back here, and I worked on it when I was teaching diary quilting throughout October. And that's when I put this gold loop around the edge of the quilt to signify my studio. And I was feeling like, my studio needs some changes. There's not enough space in here. I want a different, I don't know what the future will look like, but I know I want to change with my studio. And so then it was pretty incredible the very next month in November to get a phone call from the folks at the Pfister about my studio. And so here you can see me quilting on the quilt. And I just think it's a really fun thing to see that sort of transformation that begins to happen as you get close to the finish line. And one of the many finish lines is moving from quilt top to quilting. And in particular, I added this blue to match the blue walls that you see behind me. And then I felt like, as I've been moving in, I have to kind of recombobulate. It's a word we like here in Milwaukee. But I had to recombobulate things. And so it was a lot of fun when I was with my quilt making students in a co-working session, and I was talking through with them, how can this move from quilt top to quilting? And I thought, I've got to move this little piece of applique over here. And there were a few gasps, and it was just so fun. And I felt that feeling again, Zach, when I saw you in the huddle and you're cutting up, especially that quilt with the flowers on it, that thrill of being able to change things and transform as you go. And so some of the things that are uniquely influenced by me being here at the hotel are these bits of blue applique to do with the wall color that I got to select, as well as I've got some little rabbit mascots that are on the floor in the entryway, and I've embroidered them on the quilt. And then the Pfister Hotel is known for having the most robust collection of Victorian art out of any hotel in America. And one of the things that I'm doing here as artist in residence is I'm giving tours of the hotel. So coming up on February 17th, I've got a tour. There are 15 spots total. I think they're going to go fast. So Google the Pfister Hotel, look out the events page, and that will be another thing that I'm going to link in the YouTube notes. But it's going to be a lot of fun to give a tour of the art here and talk about which paintings and which sculptures resonate, and which bits of furniture and which bits of fashion resonate with me as I walk around and explore here. And I'll be able to share that point of view with everyone. That Saturday, I'm also going to have an open studio where I'll be sewing, and that kind of engagement in the studio has really been illuminating and interesting to me in terms of what quilts resonate with people right away, what folks see when they see a quilt immediately. This quilt to my side, I began as a reflection on 2021, so I can only see it as a 12-month calendar, but only about 10% of people see that on their own. They need me to explain it when they see it. And that's just been so interesting to kind of learn to unsee what I did with that quilt. The quilt here then, I've done a lot of crazy quilting stitches. Zach, I began with the herringbone stitch that you taught me in Madeline Island when I made this quilt over my left-hand shoulder. And then I started looking through an old embroidery book that I had and found a variety of other crazy quilt stitches that felt really fun to think about that era of Victorian times and how popular crazy quilting was then. So if you start to see more examples of things that are Victorian that might meld with my work and be a way of adding to that diary quilt quality in the work of you know, how can it be part of it? How can I tell the story of the Pfister without necessarily needing to use words? But here, these are my little rabbits. This is the very first time I've ever cut up clothing from my father and put it in a quilt. And I've added some text about the places that I've been working on this quilt: Woodland Retreat, Milwaukee, France, Florida, Austin, Texas.
Heidi, can I interrupt and ask a question while
Oh,
you have it on?
yeah.
So the hole that the rabbit is on, is that where the blue pieces originally were?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That's
And
cool.
I had a little more of this pink fabric. It's a piece of fabric that my friend Takako bought for me in Japan. And part of why I wanted to use it is because, especially in August, I was really excited that teaching in Japan was going to happen. I'm going there in April. And so that's the piece of fabric that I had. And it's got this wonderful sun bleaching on it. So here you can see the lighter color is the sun on it. And this is the more unaltered pink. Oh, we got a vacuum cleaner or something. Let me close the door.
You just never know what's going to happen at the Pfister. I can't tell you how many conversations Heidi and I have been having on the phone while she's there. And she starts talking to somebody that walks in to see her work, and I just hang up. I said, Heidi can call me back.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting to be in a public studio this way. So, but yeah, it was so much fun to cut out that hole and just resituate things and then embroider over, noticing the hole, but also not worrying about the hole too much. And so then this is where I relocated and pivoted. I did a 90-degree pivot on these. And, you know, just that act of getting used to having an open studio, it felt so representative of my experience being here already, of like some things fit and other things like I need to adjust, and other things the residency needs to adjust. And we're all kind of finding our way and working together. And this just felt like a wonderful metaphor of like lifting a little bit of that up and moving it. And then here you can see this close up of this arm. I think I might have mentioned this last time. I've been struggling with some tendon issues in my right shoulder. And so for a while, it was real hard to go any lower than this when I moved my arm. And I returned to occupational therapy because that's where they make people better. And so I've been able to get a lot more mobility back in my arm. And I have these nice separate keyboards because it is my keyboard life more than my quilting life that's causing this particular shoulder issue. And so it just felt really nice to identify some of these places in my body that have been impacted by this current tendon thing. And so this is the collaborative quilt that I made with Zach. And just a little reminder that if you want to know more about the residency, it is on Seamside. And then a little update about my retreat in Sardinia. That is still on track to happen in July. We've got 7 people signed up so far. We need 5 more for it to be a go to officially happen in July. If you're in Milwaukee and you want to escape the Republican National Convention happening here, you could come with me to Sardinia And this is the hotel that we'll be at. And this is the yoga space where I'll be teaching some nice, gentle, accessible yoga in the mornings. And this is the space where we'll be sewing and working in the afternoons. It's got some temperature control in it, so we will not be sweltering, but we're also going to escape and go on a boat and see some murals and hike and swim and just, balance sewing and vacationing. And that's what I'm hoping to do with my students in Japan as well, is share a little bit about how do you hold both at the same time? How do you have a great trip, but also document and tell the story and do a little bit of sewing. So this is a place that we'll be walking to from our hotel and enjoying. And then here, the finish along. I'm just so excited about this opportunity for a lot of people now who are learning from me without any live interaction. You're watching an on-demand class, or you're watching on Creative Bug, or you're working with a pattern. And I'm just really, really excited to have this as an opportunity for people to learn with me live. We're going to have 15 hours of co-working time. I'm kind of notorious for ending, but then saying, if you want to stay later and mingle, you can. So they might be more than 3-hour long sewing sessions, but that way, hopefully, depending on time zones and schedules, even if you can't make the whole 3 hours, maybe there's an hour in there that does fit with your schedule where you can join live. And the top thing that I am going to be finishing at that time is my love letter quilt that launched this summer with Creative Bug. And I made a quilt top at Creative Bug, and then I got home and I never quite finished my quilt. So now I want to finish piecing together the swap out blocks that I made and make a few extra blocks. And then I'm going to start quilting that quilt. And that is one that I really want to have a finished version of my love letter quilt existing in the world. And that's something that I'm going to be doing. And hopefully finishing along several other things also. If I were to spin my camera around, you would see that my travel diary quilt that I began in France is not complete yet, as well as I made a moon improv quilt pattern, and I started that and then never finished it. So I'd like to do one of those. And I think on my blog post, I list another quilt that I want to finish too, but the list can be long. Progress will be made. Finishing isn't necessarily guaranteed, but it should be a lot of fun and a lot of different ways and places to interact with that. And felt like just a fun alternative to starting something new yet again in March. So let's just keep on going and make some nice progress.
Is there a discount for friends of Heidi that need to finish projects?
Oh, yes, Zach, you're in. You same way as I moonlight in your sewing. I will send the link to both of you. That would be a dream to have both or either of you join us. Absolutely.
Wonderful. Luke, I think it's your turn, buddy.
I'm ready for it. Okay, y'all. Well, I guess, look, I'll share. Then I'll have something to talk about. Hold on. Where is it? Here we go. All right. Share. Play. Ha. Close. So, in a lot of ways, this is as almost always happens in soft bulks, our projects tie together in some really fascinating ways. Some deconstruction and some finishing are all kind of in this project. So I want to talk about quilt clothes, but not so much about quilt clothes, but clothing as it overlaps in the Venn diagram of craft and quilting. So it's not necessarily that I want to start a conversation about should we, shouldn't we, or is it cool to make a jacket? But like, let's talk about the history of it a little bit, and let's say, okay, actually, it comes from a lot of places. This isn't a new thing, and it's not reductive. I actually think it is productive. But anyway, let's start with me first. I've been making quilt clothes for a long time. This was from 2015. I think the first quilt blazer I ever made, and I say made a bit loosely because I worked with a tailor to help me do it in 2011, maybe. So I've been doing it for a while. You can't see me there because I'm camouflaged, but here I am. I worked with the graffiti artist to make me a blazer for this exhibition. Here I am in Paducah with a quilt jumpsuit in, I don't know, some odd year, 2018, something. Again, just matching my exhibitions with clothing has been something I worked on for a lot of years. And I'll talk about me more later. Happy to chat about that. But I think it's as important to talk about the history of sort of garments as it flip-flops in quilting, right? So this is a picture of a quilt from Gee's Bend. These are very clearly pieces of jeans that have made into a quilt. So this is a quilt from clothing. Here is another example of clothing turned into a quilt. I mean, these are stunning objects. And it is the clothing, the texture, tactile, human experience imbued in the clothing itself that I think lends some magic to this. I certainly won't say all the magic because the stitching and the composition and that red really, chef's kiss. But I will say that the texture of the jeans allows an entry point that we have that you might not have, right? And one of the things I love about quilts is that people who aren't quilters can still talk about them, right? It's like, if you put up a painting, there's a barrier in a lot of people's mind to having gone to art school or having studied art, and before they sort of say, oh, I can like it, I can't like it. Maybe I don't know enough about the Renaissance to know if I like your painting, which I don't think is true. But I think with quilts, we don't give ourselves that barrier. And I think that's brilliant. And one reason for that, this is an opinion, not a fact, but one reason for that I think is that the fabric itself has an entry point, right? Like in this case, you say, those are jeans. I know about jeans. I've worn jeans. Therefore, I can think what this quilt is in the world and make opinions about it. And I think that's so beautiful and interesting and allows quilts to be accessible because we've all had fabric, we've all had blankets. Regardless of if you make quilts, I think you can form opinions about them existing in the world in a way that maybe is harder for massive marble sculpture or, Damien Hirst drowning a shark or whatever. And one of the things that did happen in the last several years is this sort of conversation about quilts turning into clothes and what that means and which side you're on, like it or don't. But I do want to say that quilted clothing has been around as long as quilting has, right? I mean, the 1800s, before hoop skirts, they were making quilts to keep their legs warm and to kind of, boost up the bottom half to make that aesthetic thing that they were into back then, fluffy bottoms. But quilts were a part of garments for so long. Maybe just quilted fabric, not necessarily taking a quilt and then repurposing it, but quilted fabric as part of garments. And so, again, there's just massive precedent there. And I just think that's important to say because quilts as garments, garments as quilts have been a flop that have been going on time immemorial. That's probably not the phrase. So now here's more clothes as quilts. And I think they're so dynamic and interesting and beautiful. Like, this one is such a simple example. I pulled this from the internet. I'm not sure who these people are. They seem pretty happy. Maybe the dad's a little warm, but that's all right. But this one is just the clothing stuck together into a blanket, put on the bed, put his name on it, done. And I think that's just so cool in these examples of clothes as quilts, quilts as clothes, back and forth, and sort of these ideas of our human experience of textiles, right? I mean, we all know the t-shirt quilt. We all know the t-shirt quilt, and those can be any number of ways of creating. You mostly see them in sort of this kind of bunch of squares together, but like that's also so cool, right? Like quilters hate to make them. They hate to make them, but like they're also beautiful objects to have, right? I mean, these are like pieces of your human experience that you wore, whether you stained them or wore them or grew bigger, grew smaller, whatever it is. These are artifacts of your experience that then go into this blanket for your further experience. I think that's so beautiful. One of the things I talk about a lot is kind of quilts as architecture. And this is one way where I think it's really beautifully illustrative, because in this case you are creating a object that is of the human scale to sort of support yourself in regards to sort of global elements, right? In this case, keeps you warm versus keeps the rain off, but it's still that architectural sort of response to environment to the human scale. But in this case, it's built with materials that are artifacts of your experience as opposed to just 2x4s. And so I think it's very architectural in that way and very interesting. Well, you guys all know this one. Just, in the conversation of quilts as clothes, quilts into clothes. Well, quilts can also be the clothes. A very famous quilter created this object for the red carpet Met Gala, Aesop Rocky, very VIP. And I didn't pull a lot of slides, but there is a lot of examples of quilts in couture fashion. There's a girl who really doesn't like this in the picture, which makes me laugh. She's given her a dirty look, which I actually really like. But so there's these textures and textiles that have started to ebb and flow in the world of couture fashion. And I think it's really interesting and cool and awesome. I mean, the more that people are into quilts, the more that people are into quilts. That's great, right? The more eyes on us, the better, right? I mean, if we're selling objects and people are buying objects, that's the economy, baby. So I'm into it. And then there's a lot of people taking quilts and making them into garments. And there are more opinions about that in different ways that, obviously people can touch on. I won't really go into it too much, but, taking existing quilts, cutting them up and then making those into garments, and kind of giving a life to them. And I think that this is a conversation with quilts as material, right? I mean, we go buy material. Oh, this is a vintage sheet. I'm willing to cut it up to make a quilt out of it. But then you're like, oh, that's a vintage quilt. Can I cut it up to make a shirt out of it? Like, I personally think that it is all right, as long as there's not, as long as you're not sort of pilfering from a family who's excited about it as an heirloom. If you find it somewhere that you have access to, good on you. But I think,
well, Luke, I'm just going to hop in and just
Yeah.
say that I think of something you said way back when, which is there's a lot of ways to love a quilt.
Yeah.
I love that idea. It's really well said.
Yeah, and there's a lot of ways to engage with quilts too, that I think can be honoring. And I think these are just so cool. And I really want that jacket, and I'm so mad because it's probably very expensive. So here I am, back to my studio, patterning some quilt pieces into some quilted garments. So here is a pair of quilty pants I made. And so a bit of the longer story is that we're moving in a couple of months, which is amazing, to Asheville. So vote for Asheville, Nook, come on. And so what that means for my studio practice is I have some commissions I'm working on, but I'm not starting any new major exhibitions. I'm trying to finish projects. And one of those things I've had on the back burner for more years than I'd like to admit is quilts into sculpture. So, I made some small objects. I made some teddy bears. There's a picture of it in a second. But sculpture that you can engage with in this sort of architectural dialogue is, I think clothing is kind of in that conversation, right? It is for the body, of the body, to keep you warm, to keep you from scratching your legs, to, make it comfortable to, sit on the subway, right? Like there's a lot of parts of clothing that are intuitively architectural in ways that I think are really wonderful. And I think quilts are already sculptural objects. And so I put the little Scotty dogs from a quilt on the pockets, which I think is cool. And I think quilts are inherently sculptural objects. And so to push them into a further sculptural realm allows me to have that conversation a little bit differently. You know, I can phrase it differently to say, okay, this is a quilt jacket that is obviously sculptural because the third dimension sort of flows into the fourth as you have to walk around it and you can engage it and you put it on, etc. Whereas a quilt on the wall sometimes is like really close to two-dimensional, right? You sort of treat it like a painting, depending on the maker, might be really flat, et cetera, et cetera. But I think quilts into sculpture allows me kind of my soapbox of talking about them in different ways through clothing. And so here's just, you know, some projects that I've made. Here's one of the bears out of the quilt, which I think is really cute. Although I had to find a sewing machine that could sew through like 5 layers of quilt, which mine did not like at all. So that's the pitfall of really thick material. But I think it really made for an awesome project. And there's another piece to the conversation that I won't necessarily editorialize, but I'm very open to opinions on. Gosh, my wolfhound is hounding me. Honey, do not right now, sweet girl. Go lay down. Go lay down. Quilt clothing that has been made clothing that has been made to look like quilt clothing, right? So this sort of fast fashion jump on the trend of quilt clothing, I think is an interesting place, right? Because the more focus on quilts, the better, right? More people saying quilts are cool, and you type in cool people who make quilts, and it goes Zach, Heidi, Luke, and we're like, yes, like yeah. But on the other hand, oversaturating a market with very affordable things that resemble the stuff that takes us hundreds of hours to make devalues our work in some ways, more values our work. And so there's a dialogue about that I haven't found quite the edge to. And I'll put up one more slide and sort of what's going on right dang now. And Heidi's wearing a great cardigan from the G's Bin collection with Target. This is a picture of some of those jackets that were made with the G's Bin collection at Target. And I think it's really an interesting conversation because the garments are referencing the quilts that the women from the G's Bin community made, and it has got a lot of eyes to them, and they have said very publicly that their commissions have over doubled since this collection launched. So that's great for them. That means there's more amazing quilts in the world. On the other hand, who says that these, they're making much money from these objects, and like where does that, and who makes them, and they're made in India, and the sort of labor practices and all of those parts of the conversation I think are really interesting. And I don't have a stance on it, right? I don't think there's any kind of wrong to businesses profiting in the way that they profit, and that's where they came from, right? We don't have a lot of umbrage with other people who have done, or at least I don't, collaborations with Target, right? It's like, oh great, their name is out there more. I just had to have a bit more pause with the sort of G's Bin quilter, because they're just, I've got a place in my heart for them, and like want them to be the most successful humans in the country, and like I think this is a way to it, but do they make money this way, et cetera, et cetera. So just something I think about a little bit as I'm making my own kind of objects and garments, and wide open for conversations about it. But mostly I made shirts and pants, and I wanted to show y'all, but it also as always became a conversation.
Oh,
as it should.
Such a beautiful presentation, and so exciting to be taken back in history, and then very I loved that. Zach, you had something on the tip of your tongue as well.
I was just going to say that your pants that you made, the quilty pants, even when you're not wearing them, still remember the contours of your body and remain a sculpture in and of themselves, which I think is just a beautiful through line that is maintained even when you're not wearing the article.
Yeah, I mean, I think like there's so much to it that I'm like unpacking in my own brain as I talk about sculpture, as I talk about architecture, as I talk about human scale, as I talk about honoring quilts as both an object, but as a medium and as a technique. Like all of those get in sort of meld into kind of quilts as garments. And I don't know. I just think it's really, really cool. And yeah, there's just a lot more to learn, and I'm learning techniques. And I will say this, I've been making quilts for, I don't know, 20 years. I've probably made 350, if not 400 quilts, but man, learning how to make clothes is a real pain in the tucks.
Especially pants and blazers.
Well, yeah.
That's tailoring. That's just not making clothes.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, thankfully, I didn't worry about aligning too much because, you know, the quilt's sticking up already. So, you know, whatever. Maybe that's next, but it's been fun to learn.
I love it. Well, thank you for giving us the sneak peek into what you've been working on. And I know that's just the tip of the iceberg. Well, as it is for all of us, right? We all have so many projects going on at any given moment. It's hard to narrow it down. If y'all have any questions for us, feel free to either, you got choices, put them in the chat, or two, you can raise your hand and just talk to us like a real live human being. Either one's fine with us. We'll take your questions anyway.
Everyone wants to know about your chicken, Zach.
This chicken was found by Christina Frazier at the Huddle at a thrift shop. There's a thrift shop just down the street that a lot of us went to, and we couldn't figure out what it was for. Most of us just kind of wore it as a hat, right? Especially when it came time to present at show and tell. But then I think Christina knew this as well. It's a bun warmer. So you put your buns in a basket or a bowl, and to keep them warm, you just lift the wing and you can pull the bun out that way.
Oh, I thought for sure it was a hot koozie.
I thought I 100% was putting money on koozie. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, and it would be, except there's no place for a teapot handle or spout. These are bun windows, without a doubt. That's what's happening here.
Amazing.
It's so fun to run across these objects and just be like, what is this? And of course, there's always someone like Christina who knows, and that's why you keep them around.
Mm-hmm.
Bun windows. Yes. Well, I know we could chat a lot. Luke, I have a lot of questions for you, but I'm going to save them for off camera. And Heidi, I know you and I caught up just for a hot minute yesterday. You know, actually, okay, so one of the things that Heidi and I talked about, I'll keep it quick, but ties to Luke, what you were saying. So I had another visit with the medium, our friend Jen. And she says, your grandma wants you to know, the one that I made the purple bathrobe quilt for, she says, use everything I gave you, is what grandma wanted me to know. And the first thing that came to my mind is my grandma, when I turned 40, called me up on the phone. She could barely hear at this time, you know. She's like, Zach, for your 40th birthday, I'm gonna give you the best thing I can think of. And it was her mother's quilt. Her mother, we have one of her quilts left in this world, all hand quilted, beautiful applique Marie Webster pattern from the 1920s, windblown tulips it's called. Anyway, it's gorgeous. And I don't know what I'm gonna do with it. But to hear the medium say, use that quilt, permission granted from the other side, Luke, makes me think about what it means to honor these objects in our lives and what they mean. Does it mean that I'm going to cut this quilt up? I have no idea. We'll find out together. But I love that I got some form of permission from the other side.
You know, I really love, so about halfway through sort of career-wise, this wonderful friend of mine was making these great objects and was using everything that she loved in them. She was doing these little postcards that had every sticker, like her favorite stickers. She would stick on a postcard and then send it through the mail to herself, and then it would have this patina, and then she would like redecorate it and then send it back and forth. And so she would always use her favorite stickers for it. And I was like, you can't use your favorite ones. You have to save the favorite ones until you know the project is good. And then maybe later you can do it with the favorite. But like, she's like, no, I can always get new favorite ones. And I mean, that just stuck with me. And, you know, I see that in myself and a lot of quilters, no fingers pointed to us as a community, but like if you save the favorite fabric, you you go buy new fabric for the project because you can't, maybe it's not perfect enough for this heirloom fabric or expensive fabric or that designer you've been sort of coveting. But Zach, I'm with you. It's like eat your favorite candy bar and listen to your favorite song and use the fabric that is the most exciting to you in that moment, because you can learn to love something else as much. You can learn new music. There's going to be a new candy bar. And like, I think you're exactly right. Like, use the stuff that you have the most passion for, because then you will spend the time engaging with the project. It's not a practice, right? You're not going to buy something new to practice a quilt so that one day you can make the one that you want to make, that you love. Well, make the one you love now. What's the worst that could happen? You could do a shitty job, but guess what? That's okay. And it's still going to be beautiful. And then you can deconstruct it and make it even more amazing, etc. So like, worst case scenario is you've got work to do. And that's pretty fun.
Oh,
because you know how to sew. We know how to sew. If we don't like it, we just keep working.
Exactly.
Yeah, this quilt over my shoulder, it's not the first one I used, but it's one of many now that has a piece of my mom's tablecloth in it. And it's been one of the really fun stories that people resonate with when they come into the studio now also. And when I first changed careers and moved to Chicago to be a quilter, and my mom was downsizing and she went to Florida and she gave me this tablecloth, and I understood that she wanted me to use it to make quilts because that's like the top thing I was doing that year. And so I made a quilt called Beginners that's, been sold since then. And then my mom saw it and my cousin Steve saw it and they were like, oh, I can't believe you cut up the family tablecloth. And I thought they had given permission, and I guess they just thought one day I would be having big dinner parties that I still, a decade later, do not have the kind of house that could remotely have the space for a dining room table like that. So it could have been folded up in a box for a decade, me doing absolutely nothing with it. Or what happened, in which now my mom is just pleased as can be about, took her a minute to realize what was going on, that it's like this little way of me saying hello to her every time I put a piece of the tablecloth in the quilt. And it's one of those fun things. It's not clothes, but that those family heirlooms and being able to reincorporate them and keep them as a living thing instead of something that's in storage is just so much of what I got from what both of you were sharing, and is really powerful and special.
And like Zach behind you, I'm sorry to interrupt. I was going to brag on your storage behind you, and like sort of you choosing that you have a finite amount of space for things in it means that the things in there become precious. And I think it's so beautiful to use things that are precious. I mean, that's why I love using reclaimed clothing, textiles, etc., quilts in the work that I make, because they are precious to begin with. And I think that your system of organization allows the material to be precious. So when you start with a pile of things that are precious, I think it can lend itself to a conversation with that's not so much about necessarily matching points, although important in some works. It's about matching ideas and spirituality and your sort of experience. I think that's so cool. Sorry to cut you off, Zach. What were you going to say?
No problem. No, it's life on Zoom. I think, so often it has felt for me that like, I think it's perceived that transforming a quilt, a pre-existing quilt, is disrespectful in a way. But I also think like, well, what is the energy of a quilt that just sits folded up in a dark closet and never gets used for anything? It never gets used to keep people warm. It never gets used as an art object. That's some funky stagnant energy that isn't inspiring for me to work with. So like, use the good stuff. And then to your point, so this is y'all know this is the original Nook. This is where I work. That's the kitchen. This is all the space I get in the apartment to work. And so I've had to come up with a creative way to keep up with my fabric. And I've been doing this now for about 6 months. I think I can say it's working. Early reports are positive. But as you can tell, it's a crate-based system. And so I have one crate for red, one crate for pink, etc. And when the red crate fills up, I got to get rid of some more red, right? I just can't keep adding crates. So a way of making ongoing micro decisions about my stash and what feels important to me, as opposed to, big annual dumps. So we'll see how that continues to go. But it does, it keeps the precious things on top.
I would love to, I don't know how it all to do an experiment, but like artists in New York versus artists in, I don't know, rural Iowa, where like rural Iowa, you can just buy a barn and stick it behind your house, no problem. You want more fabric, buy a second barn, go for it.
Yeah.
Right? But like New York City, Zach has a Nook, hard stop, full exclamation part. Like you ain't got in a barn, you can stick behind you to fill with fabric. So I think like, and that also, it sort of, that preciousness, etc. I think will influence your work. I would love to know how that influences work, right? Like if you have a barn to store anything that you want versus you have to be real precious. And like, I imagine it makes a difference in the scale of the work and the material, etc. I just think that'd be fascinating to know what that difference is and kind of how people perform their marks in the world and what they make.
Well, I mean, my first noticing, Luke, about this process is that I can only use what I know that I have, right? So if I can't see it, and my memory is finite for keeping track of all the bins that I have stashed around, I can only use what I know that I have. So I am limited that way already. And so this helps keep me present with the elements that I have to work with for any given project.
Zach, I love how that's connecting as well to your word for the year, space, and how you've got space around these physical objects as well as the mental space around working. And then Luke, I'm seeing you sharing that you're moving, and that feels like such an incredible act towards your goal of contentment. And for some reason, when I was trying to remember what your word was, I was thinking comfort there's such a similarity there. And like the physical comfort of wearing quilted clothing, in contrast to other kinds of clothing, and that contentment, that like feeling good in your body and your clothing, for me, when I started dressing differently to not be like a high school teacher going to the office anymore, but to be an artist who gets to wear what they want, it changed my life to have that kind of contentment around clothing. And I'm curious if you could share a little bit more about how that word is impacting, or even just like plans around, like, this is you moving home in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah. Oh, it's a good card. Like, how do you move, but try to be content, because moving is the worst. We all know it. And as a sort of neurodivergent, right? Like, ADHD, some Asperger's, like the thing that happens when I touch an object is I have to engage with it, right? It's like very object permanence. If I touch a thing, I think about every time I've touched it, and is it important, and what can I do with it? And that project reminds me of another one, and can I make this? And like, wow, now I've got a new career, right? But like, that's everything I'm putting into a box that I own. So you're exactly right. How do you sort of filter contentedness through the act of reliving every object you have ever brought into your home? I think it's so interesting and important. Like, having learned that about myself, I'm like, okay, now let's only keep the ones that are forward directions, right? Because it's really easy to say, gosh, I didn't finish this XYZ exactly right. Let me keep the artifact of it that maybe I can fix, or it'll remind me that I'll do a better job next time, or like this kind of a thing. So having this kind of permission to just, get rid of, redonate, regift things that I'm not able to finish myself, or like don't have the time, bandwidth, or just the inspiration. I mean, I love having other friends in the medium where I can just say, I made this quilt top. I've had it for 10 years and haven't touched it. You can have it, do anything you want with it, including regift, burn it, throw it away, whatever. But maybe it's an inspiration for you. It's a really fun way that I find some contentedness in the packing, right? It's like, if I'm not using this, very Marie Kondo, except the scale is a bit longer. Maybe it's not a week or a month, but it's a decade. But just regift, relove, I think is an important thing for me as I'm thinking about sort of processing objects and items.
As you were sharing, I was thinking about a different Japanese decluttering expert. I believe his name's Fumio Sasaki, but for sure the name of his book is Goodbye Things. And I read Goodbye Things twice now. And he's a strict minimalist, but leaves space that his mindset could apply to any number of people. And a few of the great tips that I've gotten from him are take a photograph and then let it go. Like, you know, because you get so nostalgic about things, but do you need the thing to have the memory? And then also he shares about the incredible expense of owning lots of stuff and stewarding so many objects. And he's a real advocate for, could it be cheaper to just rent that than to own it and store it indefinitely? And just that's really been giving me pause as I've been making this quilt and outlining my studio. Like when I did that, I didn't think I was manifesting this Pfister studio. I thought I was guiding myself towards putting like with like and paring down my belongings. I'd say, even if it's got a lot of memories and nostalgia, like it's not serving me right now. How can I, just think about, streamlining and moving things forward so that I can be productive and feel really free and capable. And that's just really.
I like it so much. One of the things that I love, so I dabbled in ceramics for the years I lived in Kansas City, and one of the things I loved about it as a culture is that not everyone had to have the big kiln, and not everyone had to have the clay roller, and so there was all of these sort of sharing of resources, right? And in a way that I don't think a lot of other mediums do, and I think that's just so kind of what you're saying is like you can rent it, you don't have to own it. I find so many people, for example, especially in LA, they buy a car because they want to go camping twice a year. So they get a car that can go off-roading to the mountains, but they drive it, 363 days a year, just on a highway, but they got that car because they want to go camping twice. And I just think it's like an interesting reframe, right? Like rent a Jeep twice a year and it's just, whatever. But like, materials and objects and experience and machines are all very accessible, especially if you don't own them all. And, or you can sort of like, okay, you buy the overlock, I'll buy the industrial, we'll trade when we need to, like that kind of a thing.
Oh, I love that idea. Yeah, I did recently indulge in getting a nice sewing machine. I got myself a Janome, and I'm really curious to see what happens now that I have a sewing machine that's going to be more pleasant to sew with, because a lot of complaints as to why I shifted to hand piecing everything was the sound bothered me, and like now earbuds exist, and so because before like there was that cord. I was always getting tired. So I can have earbuds, but also it's a quieter machine, and just having like the larger foot pedal. And I've got a lift and lower desk now, inspired partly by you sewing and standing, because I used to have a lot of like shoulder blade issues and low back issues. And I feel like now I'm getting and investing in some of that technology that will allow me to be more nimble, because I think one of the issues for me at least is repetitive movements. And if you're doing same thing with your body, incessantly, that's going to cause all kinds of problems. And for me lately, it's a computer-based problem. And so I've been trying to streamline and redirect things so I have more sewing time and I'm not constantly tied to the computer. And I think that's going to be good for my health, but also diversifying those movements while sewing. It's just, I'm feeling very curious about what a new machine pieced quilt for me could look like, because it's been a while.
Yeah, that's cool. It's sort of the same conversation as far as like the machine being a problem started you hand stitching. Zach not having an extra barn started him editorializing his fabric stash. So there's all of this stuff that inherently changes our work. I mean, you can look at a lot of major artists through history and find some studio parameters that maybe made a problem, or even just like the size of doors for painters, right, etc. Like there are things that affect entire bodies of work that are maybe not conscious, right? Like, oh well, red paint's more expensive, I'm going to do a blue period, right? Like, you know, this kind of a thing. So I just think it's like fascinating to know something like you having a machine that's more ergonomic is going to allow an entire change of your work. It should be dynamic.
Yeah. Yeah. And just that, you know, that spark of improv acting and saying yes and, you know, reminds me of our conversation that we had, I think in episode 3 with Sherry Linwood of artists working with instead of fighting against, and saying, oh, you know, there's this problem, that's okay, I can still make art, I can still find a way forward, is just always so exciting to stay in tune with, and to stay like curious about how can I make it work instead of stacking up reasons why it can't work.
Well, and we love to say yes, but we also need no's, right? And so problems, limitations give us boundaries, give us no's, and that can help us out quite a bit. Gives us a starting point.
Honestly, it's one of the things I loved about architecture the most was that you had a lot of parameters to work with, right? There's like, you're not building it. Well, the joke in architecture is this thing called the sky hook, because, you know, like architectural students will forever build things or design things that look like beautiful, but will just fall over if they were ever in the real world. So the professors would be like, I see you employed the sky hook technique, you know, which is like, you know, just a hook from the ether. But you know, in architecture, you're like, okay, it has to exist here. And guess what? Weather happens and people happen and dirt happens. So like you have to incorporate those. I think it's just so beautiful in the, you know, in the same way that like reclaimed material has artifacts of its experience in it, you know, and quilts and, you know, used, just all this stuff really gives us something to work with and against, right? Like Heidi, you patch a lot. And by that patching, you are adding beauty and history to either the garment or the quilt, but that wouldn't happen unless you wore it out. And you know, so I just think, yeah.
Well, and even just seeing the way that your quilt pants are getting broken in initially, I've exhibited sometimes my mended leggings, because that's what I like to wear, and so having 5 of them on hangers on a wall, the lycra starts to fail, and so they become these incredible sculptures where the knees are saggy, and then there's this transparency in the thigh from me bending my knees and stretching and snapping that elastic, and they are anything but the flat pair of leggings that I bought on the rack in the store initially. And I'm excited to see how those pants and objects only get better and richer and more 3-dimensional as you wear them longer too.
Oh, I can't wait to patch them. I'm excited for that, right? Like I'm just like wear them out. Like I'm gonna go sledding without the sled. Let's get it done so I can patch them. There's this and I've sort of in my architecture brain today, but there was this beautiful project by Le Corbusier, who's the father of modern architecture. Just the sort of like every white box is his fault, like, you know, flat roof his fault, in some brilliant ways. But he did this housing complex in France, right? A bunch of like, you know, flat roofed white boxes, and then like to look at that work decades later, the people who live in the houses have added shutters, have put on pitched roofs, have like changed the way that the architecture exists, because like shutters make a difference in terms of temperature and storms, and a pitched roof means that your house doesn't leak. But it's like mending, you know, these sort of like austere, you sort of have this idea, and I think this is really in keeping with all 3 of our works, y'all's too especially, but like this sort of platonic ideal of quilt, right? Points and log cabins or whatever, but then in the real world, they don't match. And let's push that. And what's the material? And how do we add our own conversation to it? And so I think it's the beauty of working back from the sort of austerity that allows our particular languages to be involved in the making of the objects that we're gifted, right? Like we came into this quilting thing not at the beginning by any stretch. And so like the backs upon which we stand have made a lot of quilts and a lot of choices. And so our language is more reductive and productive than it is reproduction. And I think that just becomes so beautiful in so many ways. Like we're putting the shutters on those houses, and that we're adding an aesthetic of our own language on top of it to it. We're making it ours, not changing it. And I think that's so cool.
I love that connection.
Yeah. Well, Zach would say, I like to say, with an eye on the time, we got 4 minutes left till a nice 90-minute.
Can I show y'all what I've been making?
Oh, please. Yeah, I'm in no rush. Yeah.
Well, no, it'll take all of 2 seconds. But I've just decided that like I'm giving myself permission to collect a little box of like just small found objects that I find around my neighborhood as I walk around, because I find these little twisted bits of wire and stuff. They're just so captivating. And so I made this little mobile while we've been sitting here talking. And this is all from this morning's walk. So it's this little piece of a branch that was painted red because somebody's painting something red in their yard. And then a little brass ring. And this is a blue moon top that I just attached with some fabric on the back so I could sew it on. But I just love, I was talking to somebody recently about how they felt when they saw a statue of the Buddha. And it was like, oh, they said instant peace. And I'm like, well, I don't know if I feel that. But when I see objects suspended like this, instant peace. So I'm playing around with these little mini mobiles and I'm having a really good time. Thank you for letting me share.
Oh, that's very exciting.
Oh, yeah.
So much 3D.
Oh, and then this thing in the back, I mean, you can't really see it. Maybe y'all saw the reel on Instagram, but it was a quilt that I started at the Huddle. And I just wasn't 100% happy with the composition. And so I was like, oh, what if I just made it into a giant tubular quilt mobile? So we'll see where that goes.
Ooh, I want it to be
seeing that suspended in the middle of space is also just like, oh, just lovely. What's that, Luke?
I said I want it to be a windsock. I want to see it sort of fill up with air passing through it or something. It just as it exists. I mean, again, sculpture, rah-rah-ree.
I just learned from my student Teresa in quilt making this weekend that she's really into an artist who I don't remember the artist's name, but she's doing a series called The Buddhist Bug. And it's this big, long, orange worm-like tube that she has her little face in and somebody else's little toes sticking out of. And they go on adventures and they do performances. And just like that too, a tube, you will be inspired by textile tubeness if you Google The Buddhist Bug.
Okay, I'm on it. Well,
yeah,
folks, Luke, last word?
No, thank you. That's my last word. Great time.
I feel content. Thank
Plenty
you.
of space.
This was so fun to catch up.
Likewise. And thank y'all for joining us. Keep in touch. So we'll see you on Instagram, or I'll see you on the Nook, or we'll see you in Heidi's class, or walking around Los Angeles. You might just run into this guy wearing an amazing quilty blazer. If you do, please say hi. Right.
And
thank you all for joining us. Take care, and we'll see you next time.
Like and subscribe to this video, and I'm tagging at the tippy top. Luke has a YouTube channel. Zach has a YouTube channel. There's a whole world of YouTube softbolt connections to access. So please link over and watch those, highlight some videos there. And thank you, everyone, and keep the conversation going.
Beautiful. Luke and Heidi, I want to talk to y'all for a second. Everybody else,